Hello again, friends. Welcome back for a long overdue part 2 of Iraq is a wreck. Thanks so much for all of you who shouted out to me saying, hey, when are you going to do that part 2? Boy, you promised. Yeah, I'm a slacker. But let's get to it now. Part 1 was all about the growth of this ISIS group and where they came from in these areas of Iraq and Syria that they were taking over, and they were storming towards Baghdad. And I explained a little bit about how they came to be and the whole Iraq dissolving. And is Iraq getting ready to be in a civil war? It already is. Is it going to collapse entirely? Probably. But in this part 2, or part 2 for my French friends, let's just talk about the repercussions of the growth of this group and what they're trying to do. Ripples in the pond that ISIS has created across the region and the wider world, because it does affect everybody, as most things do in a connected global world. So let's get to it and do it, shall we? For starters, what's happened in the last week or 2 weeks since I did that podcast has repercussions in and of itself. And what I mean by that is the ISIS group, and ISIS was, what did it stand for? The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. They have grand designs to take over the Middle East and make it into a grand Islamic caliphate or Islamic state that would be the leader of all Islamic people on planet Earth. Well, lo and behold, that's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to make it real. And since the first podcast, they have now declared that they are, name change, the IS now, not the ISIS. They've gone from ISIS to IS. So they went from the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria to IS, which they are saying stands for Islamic State. Just Islamic State. I guess it's the Islamic State. I don't know. But they're referring to themselves as IS, and they are saying that we are a legitimate state now with borders. So we've taken the areas of war, civil war-torn Syria that they controlled, and now they've added it to the chunks of Iraq that they swept across in a blitzkrieg of a couple weeks ago. And they're putting it all together, saying, we control this area. We're forming a government. We got a flag. We got a name. We'll write a constitution. We're forming a government. We're going to build buildings. And we are the Islamic State. And so we even have a head, the Caliph, which is the head of a caliphate or Islamic State. And our Caliph, and I don't even know his name. It doesn't matter. He'll probably be dead soon. Our Caliph is the leader of all Islamic people everywhere. Let's just hold up the horse and buggy there for a second. That's repercussion number 1. So these guys are trying to be legitimate. Okay. Goody two shoes for you guys. But there's big problems with that for you guys. So in pretending, or you know what, I shouldn't even be so arrogant as to suggest they're pretending, in stating that they are a state and that they're going to be legitimate, they're opening themselves up for attack huge. Not that they weren't already by their actions. But here's the deal. Terrorist organizations, rebel groups if you want to call them that, individuals fighting for stuff all over the world, they're very hard to track down, root out, and kill in their entirety. They're very hard to kill in their entirety because they're individuals, especially if they're in urban areas. You can't blow up a whole city just to get a group of Islamic terrorists. However, by forming a state, you're making it a whole lot easier for outsiders to do just that. So by saying we're a state and we're going to build bridges and buildings and we're going to have a big-ass government building where all of our Islamic legislators get together, the outside world's going, oh goody, what you've just done is given us a big place on the map we can put an X on to drop a bomb on. So you can try to be as legitimate as you want, ISIS, but being legitimate has a price, and that is any infrastructure they build, any armies that they have out in the open, any tanks they have, any aircraft hangars, all of that now is fair game because you are now in a state. And states are excellent at killing other states. That's been the big shift of the last 100 years, by the way. States are awesome at killing other states. U.S. versus Japan. Hell, we know where Japan is. We can go kill them. Germany versus everybody. Yeah, Germans got that. Jawohl, they go kill everybody who's not in Germany. But rooting out Al-Qaeda, that's tougher. Getting the Taliban, yeah, that's tough. Because there are small groups of people all over the place. But you just formed up a state? Thanks. Now we can use our old school state apparatus to come kill your state. Old school states, and what I mean by that is, the old school way of you have a state that's defined territory and you have your army and all that stuff. They are more than equipped, especially the U.S., to go destroy other states. We're not so good at getting individuals. So by ISIS forming a state called IS, they're opening themselves up for increased attack and destruction. By all means, build a presidential palace so it can be bombed on its ribbon-cutting day. On top of that, the whole idea that this group speaks for Islamic people everywhere is probably troubling Islamic people everywhere. So there's 1.6 billion Islamic folks in the world, Muslims in the world, mostly concentrated from Morocco to Indonesia and Malaysia. That's a pretty good swath. I dare say that 1.6 billion people are not accepting this self-proclaimed caliph as their leader. Some are, perhaps, but they're pretty few and far between. 99.9% of Islamic folks everywhere are what we call sane, and are not pining for a great Islamic caliphate to encompass all of the world. So they certainly aren't pledging their allegiance to somebody who they don't know in some foreign state that's not even close to them. Even within the radical 0.1%, the cuckoo for Cocoa Puff Islamic warriors who think that having an Islamic State would be great. Even many of them are not so sure that this dude is their caliph. You have groups like al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban who have already openly said, oh, hang on, we're not so sure about we didn't elect this guy. Quite frankly, maybe it's just jealousy, but al-Qaeda doesn't support this group because al-Qaeda didn't do it. Al-Qaeda has been in charge of the Islamic Jihad movement, and they're getting usurped by this group who now has territory and is claiming to speak for Islamic people everywhere. So al-Qaeda's like, we don't think so. You don't speak for us. We're kind of in charge of the cuckoo section of Islamic folks in the world. And even the Afghan Taliban, which did control a state called Afghanistan for a while, has said, well, okay, well, we're going to tread lightly here. That's great you guys are doing that, but we're not pledging allegiance to you yet, if ever. So there's internal divisive issues within the Islamic fringe even of whether this is a legitimate group. And certainly within the greater Islamic world on planet Earth, not many people are going to sign up for this, and it's going to be divisive as to what? Who are these folks? And in forming a legitimate state with legitimate territory and legitimate borders, yeah, I've already talked about how they're opening themselves up for all sorts of chaos from the outside world who now has a place to vent their frustrations and attack. That's just one repercussion. Let me get to a whole bunch of other ones, and I'm just going to touch upon these. And for anybody who's watching this podcast, these are hypotheticals. This is not hardcore fact. We're speculating what might happen in the future, and all I'm doing is suggesting some things to think about that are going to change because of this ISIS group forming an Islamic State in parts of Iraq and Syria. First off, I guess I should say what I've been saying for a while, that I do believe it's the end of the state of Iraq. It's, to me, a foregone conclusion. They're already in civil war or civil chaos, whichever way you want to define it. And what that's going to mean for the Kurds in particular is that they're going to declare independence. I've been preaching this for years. I hate to act like I'm a know-it-all. I'm not. I still could be wrong. But boy, the Kurds are still right on track and making every indication and every move that they are going to give up on this state called Iraq and go ahead and form a free and sovereign Kurdistan in northern Iraq, the area that they control. Now, there are Kurds in northern Iraq and in eastern Turkey and in western Iran and other places, in parts of Syria. But the Kurdish part of Iraq is actually an autonomous Kurdish area in Iraq. They have spokespeople at the government level of Iraq. They have been running their own government in northern Iraq, and they've been doing it successfully. In fact, they've been doing it more successfully than the government of Iraq. So they can make every argument right this second that, hey, ISIS hasn't invaded here. When they tried, we repelled them, which means we can defend this territory. We have all these oil fields, some major oil fields we control in Kurdistan, which means we have an economy and we have money flowing in. We don't really need Iraq. We don't need the state. We don't need the central government in Baghdad. We don't need nothing. And in fact, we can defend our territory, and you, the central government of Iraq, can't. So who's more sovereign here? For those of you who've taken my class, you know that I believe one of the number one rules of sovereignty still goes back to the classic rule of sovereignty, which is, can you defend your territory? If you're claiming you're in control of your territory, can you defend it from anybody trying to take it over? The Kurds have so far proven they can. Iraq, not so much. So the Kurds, and you can make this argument, are actually more sovereign right now than the state of Iraq is. And I believe they're going to play off of that and go ahead and become a sovereign state and declare independence very soon and be able to prove it. For those that don't know anything about the Kurds, I won't go into a Kurdish lecture here, but for centuries, that's in the hundreds, have been wanting a free and independent Kurdistan. This isn't new, but this is their first, bestest, and perhaps onlyest real opportunity to make that a reality, and I believe they're going to do it. Just in the last 48 hours, the Kurds have seized some Iraqi-run oil fields near their territory, near Kirkuk. And that's because they say, hey, ISIS people are going to take this oil field over. Iraq can't defend it, so we're going to take it. They have also said that they are not going to participate in the Iraqi government anymore. They said, we're out. We're not participating in the parliament. We're not sending our people to the Iraq government because we think it's dysfunctional, corrupt, and we're not getting a fair say in it. One of the main Kurdish leaders, if not the leader of the Kurds in Kurdistan, and I don't know his name, said last week that he thinks Nouri al-Malaki, that's the current prime minister of Iraq that we talked about last podcast, the leader of the Kurds says that he considers Malaki a Shia dictator. That's a strong term. Which means he's saying and suggesting, yes, Nouri al-Malaki has stacked the entire deck of Iraq's government with Shia allies. He's stacked the whole military with Shia allies, and they don't care about us Kurds. They don't care about the Sunnis, and they don't care about us Kurds either. By the way, that's exactly the argument that the Sunni radicals have been making. By the way, part two, this is now what everyone in the world is saying, that Nouri al-Malaki really has screwed up Iraq in that he didn't allow U.S. troops to stay on, even in a ancillary capacity for training military advisors. So that was mistake number one. Everybody's like, yeah, you kicked all the U.S. people out or didn't allow U.S. people to stay. So therefore, you have this mess. But more importantly, he made Iraq back into a sectarian divided state. Shias on one side, Sunnis on the other, Kurds up there, and everybody hates each other. And Malaki has facilitated that to escalate down the toilet. So pretty much everybody hates this guy. The point, getting back to the repercussions with the Kurds, is they're going to use this as a pawn in a greater chess game here and say, we control these oil fields and you can't, Iraq. We can control our territory and you can't, Iraq. Malaki is a corrupt dictator, a Shia dictator. And by the way, we already lived through an era of a Sunni dictator. That was Saddam Hussein. So we, the Kurds, and I'm speaking as a Kurdish person now, would say, okay, well, we've been screwed for centuries. And then for the last 50 years, you had a Sunni dictator who destroyed us, and now you have a Shia dictator who is trying to destroy us. They're gonna out. They're gonna jump, and they can defend themselves and their territory. To me, that's pretty logical. And then it's to the point of, well, ISIS controls half the country. Kurdistan is now out for a third of the country. What is the rest of the country going to do? Be reabsorbed by Iran? Or are they going to try to fight for control to retake over the areas they've lost to ISIS and destroy this Islamic State? That is the question we can't answer yet, but they're certainly going to need outside help to do it. And the U.S. has said that they're not going to provide that outside help. Okay, who will? Well, maybe Iran. That'd be strange. Maybe other Arab states. That'd be stranger. It's kind of a weird situation. But we're just talking about repercussions, not going full on into specifics of each one. What else is going to happen here? I think you're likely to see, as a repercussion of the growth of this ISIS radical group and their now new Islamic State, I think you're likely to see covert support for Syria's Bashar al-Assad to rise. I think that Russian diplomats are making the case openly now. They're saying, see. This is what Vladimir Putin and all of us have been telling you. You guys want Syria to be in a state of civil war. You want Bashar al-Assad to die and go away because you don't like him. And look what big shit pie you've created by destabilizing Syria. The rise of ISIS is a direct result of the fall of Syria. And Vladimir Putin personally, I'm sure, has already put out communications that have said, see, I told you. This is why we have been supporting you guys call him a right-wing military dictator. Fine. We don't care what you call him. That's exactly the type of person that we are supporting in the Middle East, and we are supporting the Assad regime because a right-wing dictator can keep a lid on things. So you guys have opened up a Pandora's box by trying to help overthrow this guy, and there's no one who can come in and stabilize this situation. You're likely seeing U.S. diplomats maybe coming around to this idea. Again, this is speculation. But I think you're going to see from Russia and other players, maybe even other Arab states, although that's trickier. But you might see people starting to say, you know what, why don't we just back off the Assad regime? Because if Bashar al-Assad and his regime can restore order to Syria, even if it's under a military dictatorship, at least that will be the end of ISIS. They will take away all those territories that ISIS has claimed in Syria. So it's likely that Russia's doing a lot more to prop up Assad, and that perhaps other states might be allowing that aid to flow more and maybe be backing off their hatred of Assad. Again, this is speculative. A lot of Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, they still hate Assad, and a lot of the money going to the rebels to overthrow him is coming from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. So it's not likely they're going to stop, but they're in a tricky situation too. The more that they destabilize Syria, it's now destabilizing Iraq. So the Gulf states can say, well, we just hate Assad, and we're gonna give money and guns to rebels to overthrow him. That's fine, but now those rebels include ISIS, who's taking over parts of Iraq and destabilizing everything. So even the Arab states, and we're talking repercussions here, the repercussions of all this ISIS stuff is that even the Arab states who hate Assad and want him dead and just like the U.S. hates Assad and wants him dead, but all these entities are like, oh, what do we do though? The more we destabilize Syria, the more we're destabilizing Iraq simultaneously. And the more we're helping build this ISIS group that's now a magnet for jihadists and whack jobs the world over who want to come to the Islamic State to make it work. So it's by trying to help your allies in Syria, it's increasingly looking like you're helping destabilize the place and helping ISIS grow stronger and stronger and stronger. So everybody has to now be thinking twice about what they're doing in Syria. I know, and it's terrible. It's a terrible civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. I'm not making light of this. I would like Bashar al-Assad to go as myself. I'm not suggesting we prop up a right-wing dictator. But the U.S. has been troubled from the start about funding rebels in Syria, and it's gotten worse. It's not gotten easier. It's gotten worse. So people are going to have to start rethinking, what's the worse or evil here? A right-wing dictatorship under Assad, or the mess that we have now that may get worse. And by the way, it's a tough call. It's a tough one. That's the repercussions of ISIS all the way over in Syria. You got to think that the Bashar al-Assad regime has been sitting back watching this and saying, sure, go ahead. Go ahead, ISIS. Let all of the people who have sent money and guns to our country to overthrow us, let them see what they've created now. So it's highly likely that the Assad regime has allowed ISIS to do all this stuff. ISIS wants to overthrow Syria too, don't get me wrong, but they've been like, no, let the world see how crazy you people are. And that makes us look sane. That could have been a ploy this whole time. And people do got to think about that. Let me get to then a couple of other ones that I'll just touch upon. This could be igniting another repercussion of the growth of this crazy ISIS group is that it could be, and I hate to say this out loud, you could be seeing the start of a Sunni-Shia schism. Say that 6 times fast. Sunnis and Shias. Sunni and Shia are the two main sects of Islam. Most of you know this. Most of the Shias are in Persia, Iran. Most of the rest of the Arab Middle East is mostly Sunni. Historically, these two groups have not had bloodshed between them. They're two different sects of Islam, but there's no great holy wars between them. There's no great bouts of bloodshed between the two sects. But it looks like it's heading that way. Because the ISIS group is Sunni, and they're hardcore Sunni. And they're hardcore Sunni to the point of kill everybody who ain't hardcore Sunni like us. and they're gaining ground, and they're forming their Islamic State. And make no bones about it, their Islamic State has no room for Shias or anybody else. So the Shias, led by Iran, are going to have to counter, and they are countering. And, Shia influence has been spreading across the Middle East via Iran. And this radical Sunni group is saying, yes, we're going to try to stop that. Now, a lot of Arab states, sane Arab states, like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, they've wanted to counter Iranian influence as well. But they don't want to do it via ISIS. Nobody wants to do it via the overthrow of every state in the Middle East. So this is a huge mess that if this turns into a Sunni-Shia war, then you're looking at outside players getting involved as well, and the U.S. is caught in the middle because we support our Arab allies, but the U.S. isn't going to get involved in a religious war that's going to redraw the states of the Middle East. And let me add in the problems with Arab states supporting radical jihadism and Wahhabism, and even sending money and guns to rebels in Syria that's now filtering to ISIS. ISIS, by ISIS declaring an IS, an Islamic State, they're also threatening the very existence of the Arab states that have been covertly funding them. That's what's so weird about all this. And let me step back. It's not been the Saudi Arabian state that has funded ISIS, and it's not been Kuwait or Yemen that has funded ISIS. That would be counterproductive. It's individual Wahhabist radicals in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia that have been funding ISIS. Okay? Let me make that clear. The Arab states have no interest in an Islamic state formed by ISIS succeeding, because the Islamic State formed by ISIS wants to destroy all the Arab states. The Islamic State is saying, we are the true Islamic caliphate. Our caliph is the leader. And all of these borders you see behind me, those were drawn by Western powers, and they're run by corrupt monarchs, and they should all be wiped off the face of the map, and just our Islamic State exist. Do you think the Saudi Arabian government supports that? Do you think Jordan supports that? Do you think any government anywhere supports destroying itself? I don't think so. It's extremist Wahhabist and extremist Islamic thought in individuals, some of them are very rich, within a lot of the Arab states that is supporting that. So it's counterproductive at this point for any Arab state to support ISIS. And of course, Iran is a Shia state. They're not supporting ISIS. So really, all of the states in this game have no interest in seeing this thing work at all. Which brings me to the last possible repercussion. Could this, and I always want to spin positive things here. It looks like nothing positive could possibly come of this mess, but here we go, because I'm just that good. Could this be the turning point for the Middle East, where these states actually start working together, where the United States starts working with some of these states, particularly Iran? I'll pull Iran back into the picture. There it is. The U.S. and Iran don't talk to each other, hate each other, haven't had diplomatic relations since 1979 when they had an Islamic Revolution in Iran. Most Arab states despise Iran since 1979 when they had an Islamic Revolution in Iran. Because Iran says, hey, we're an Islamically run state, all the rest of these other chumps aren't. And we are the true purveyors of a good Islamic model that all these other states should follow. And none of the other Arab states are that keen on that, okay? Could this be, and they fought, okay? There had been plenty of wars between, or I would say wars, battles for influence of control of the Middle East between Persia and the Arab states. Most notably, the 1980 to 88 Iran-Iraq War. That's right, Iran-Iraq War, ding ding, where crazy-ass Sunni Saddam Hussein declared war on Shia Iran. That was mostly sponsored by Arab states who were propping up Saddam Hussein to go do that. They're like, yeah, we hate Iran. Iran's getting too powerful. Iran has had this Islamic revolution that they're going to try to export to our country. So Saddam Hussein, you're whack-ass crazy. Go attack them. And so they had an 8-year war between Iran and Iraq that left millions dead, total bloodshed, total insanity. Nothing was changed by the end of it. But it's symptomatic of this greater friction in the Middle East between Iran and the Arab world. and God forbid, whatever God you pray to, this turns into a greater Sunni-Shia schism that would involve everybody in a much greater war than just an Iran-Iraq war. ISIS would be all for it. Al-Qaeda may even be all for it. I don't know. But it would be horrific for all players involved. And that's why I'm suggesting in a positive spin, could this be the turning point? Are they going to go down that road? Are they really going to go down that road? Because it's easy to see where that leads. Or could it be that since none of these states have gotten along, the U.S. and Iran and the rest of the Arab world have not gotten along since 1979, could this be the opportunity? Because they actually have a lot more in common than they have not in common anymore. And what I mean by that is, if right this second, the U.S. and Iran have about 30 things that they would both like to see happen in Iraq, and they're the same things. The U.S. has had no diplomatic relations with Iran for 30 years. We've been having talks on the side to try to talk Iran out of getting a nuclear weapon. So those negotiations have been going forward, even though we hate them and even though there's all this mess going on. Why not open it up? Because the strategic goals of both Iran and the U.S. are aligned at this point, and both countries want a stable Iraq. It's in neither country's interest to have Iraq devolve into civil war. Neither one. Iran, of course, has a whole lot of influence now with the al-Malaki government because it's a Shia government and they're aligned with Shia Iran. And that actually may be a strength. That may be a reason why the United States changes its tune and says, hey, you know what? Let's get you on board. I've actually read already a whole bunch of different news stories about behind the scenes, are Iran and the U.S. talking? Could Iran be the turning point in all this? That if we get Iran involved, Iran has a serious military, man. They're not to be trifled with. And they have serious influence in Iraq. And could the Iranians possibly be a strategic partner in Iraq right now and actually come in and help push back this ISIS tide? They got a better chance than anybody else. The U.S. isn't going to put boots on the ground. Arab states would be extremely hesitant to put boots on the ground there. They don't have a lot of experience, quite frankly. Their militaries aren't quite that big. So Iran is actually a critical player. We could be, again, let me finish this up. We're talking about repercussions of this strengthened ISIS group that's now claiming an Islamic State. And it could be that it helps thaw relations between the U.S. and Iran, who have everything in common, and also may thaw relations between Iran and the Arab world, who also share a lot of things in common. Let me just, off the top of my head, point out a few things that Iran, the U.S., and all Arab states would have in common right this second. I believe that all of these entities would like to prevent a full-on Sunni-Shia religious war. That is in no one's interest. You're not going to, the Sunnis aren't going to kill all the Shias, and the Shias aren't going to kill all the Sunnis, so what's the point of the war? Ideologically, these two sects aren't even that different. So this would be a total waste of it just would be a human tragedy to start this sectarian war in which no one can possibly win. So all entities have that as a number one shared priority. Let's not let this turn into a religious war. None of the entities, Arab states, Iran, nor the United States, want to see Iraq collapse. It's not going to help anybody. All it does is facilitate the rise of more extremist groups and the growth of this IS state, which I've already pointed out, Arab states are not keen on, and Persian state is not keen on. So you got to hold Iraq together or hold something together so that ISIS doesn't get it. Everybody shares that in common. Now let's make it real. Which state over here do you think has it in their interest to keep the oil flowing out of the Persian Gulf? Which state wants to keep the Persian Gulf open and accessible and all of this oil flowing through it? Which state? I think that's all of them, including the United States again. Everybody wants that. What else do they share? I'll give you a couple more. And these are just now reiterating some of these points I've crystallized. Which one of these states wants to erase its boundaries? Which state would like to go away? Which state would like its government to collapse? Which state wants to give away territory to an Islamic State? The answer, none of them. Everybody shares that in common too. And I'll end up with, let me finish with this. What else does everybody have in common? And this is a strange one. Everybody actually doesn't want the U.S. involved. And it's true. Iran doesn't want the U.S. to increase troop presence here again. Remember, the U.S. has been decreasing troop presence here. The U.S. has been trying to make a strategic diplomatic shift out of the Middle East into East Asia. So the U.S. has been trying to move forces out of here, trying to beef up the local Saudi Arabian army and military, trying to beef up their Jordanian neighbors and U.S. allies, trying to maintain Egypt as a strong ally, even though they're having their civil war. So the Persians don't want the U.S. to increase troop presence. Many of the Arab states are probably over it as well, even though they're strong allies with the U.S., and would like to take on the mantle of their own self-defense and security with their own defense forces, which they have been increasing. And, believe it or not, the U.S. doesn't want to increase its troop forces there either. So, lo and behold, what I name off 4 or 5 different things that all parties, including Iran, have in common here to hold Iraq together and possibly work together to make sure that Iraq does maintain itself and that oil does continue to flow and that the U.S. does continue to perhaps pull out its presence and let the locals sort out their own affairs and maintain the sovereign state system that's been in place for the last couple hundred years that everybody kind of recognizes their borders. Nobody wants to see that go away. Those, my friends, are just a handful. And it took a half an hour, and I'm just tangentially hitting this stuff. Those are just a few things to think about of the repercussions of this newfound Islamic State and the possibility that this ISIS group, if left unchecked, will continue to grow and take over more and more areas of Syria, of Iraq, and possibly even more. I think not. I think the more legitimate they get, the more self-destructive they're going to get from inside, but also leading to destruction from the outside. But history will tell, like it does with all things. Does that help at all? Was that good? Was that a decent part 2? If you made it all the way to this point, give me a shout out. Let me know that you saw me to the end. And here's for peace in the Middle East, and that you learned something. But for now, party on.